Hey, what's up guys, aarava here, and welcome back to a brand new video here today, and welcome to my reaction to the brand new Red Bull Challenger for 2020, the RB16, obviously piloted by Max Verstappen and Alex and Albon. And straight away, you can tell it is a Red Bull car. Of course, the livery is literally the exact same as last year, which I, for one, am not too peeved off at. Obviously, I know a lot of people made the usual jokes that it looks literally like last year's car, obviously to go along with also the same jokes people are making about the Ferrari car. But to be honest, for me, the Red Bull, the current livery they've got with the matte finish and the kind of key design points they've got in terms of where the red lines are, the way they've placed everything in terms of the logos and whatnot, especially with the Honda stickering as well since last year. I think a few people were saying this at the back end of last year, over the last year in general. The Red Bull livery is turning into a bit of a modern classic that you can't really perhaps appreciate now, but maybe in many years' time when Red Bull maybe aren't even in the sport anymore, you might look back at the Red Bull liveried cars and think, yeah, you know what, that was a real classic look for a Formula 1 car. Very much like almost people look back at older designs from the 80s and 90s and say, those were classics. That was a really striking livery, really great one. I think the Red Bull one is going to become a timeless one that you'll look back on and appreciate. But of course, F1 fans are going to be F1 fans and say that why isn't anything changed there? I mean, to be fair, I also have been partial to when Red Bull used to change it subtly from 2012 to 2013, with splashes of colors here and there. But I think they found something that works really well for them. I've always liked the matte finish Red Bull. So lo and behold, that's the look of the Red Bull aesthetics-wise. So delivery-wise, nothing to get excited about. But the actual car itself is something to get excited about. There are some key changes to this car, especially the front end. They really have actually changed it quite a fair bit compared to what they usually do. Red Bull usually haven't done that much with the nose per se compared to this year. Looks like they've really changed that entire area of the car. And in general, obviously, we're looking forward to hopefully having Red Bull hitting the ground running. Red Bull for so many years now have started slow and then got fast at the end of the season where it's maybe too late to make a difference. Yes, they pick up some wins with Verstappen, but it's a bit too late to really make any dent in the championship. Whereas this year, we're hoping they can hit the ground running for now. The 7th year we've been hoping that. But this time round, the signs are there. No longer is the car looking a little bit barren. It looks pretty fleshed out in terms of aero bits, and we haven't even got to pre-season yet. So they might bring new stuff. And also, we've got some quotes from the drivers Verstappen and Albon, both hoping that this year will be the one where they start fast, hopefully. So delving into the actual analysis of the car itself, we start off at the front end here, and there's plenty to look at. We're going to start off with the general shape of the front wing in comparison to what they ended off at the end of last season and just generally what they ran for most of last season. It perhaps seems like they've gone for a bit more of an aggressive approach, potentially. They were quite kind of more leaning towards what Mercedes had. Mercedes and Red Bull last year were very much in the camp opposite to Ferrari. Ferrari had this very aggressive front wing that tapered in low at the edge of the end plate, whereas Mercedes and Red Bull had it a little bit higher, creating some outwash there on the front wing. Red Bull seemed to have maybe just gone with a more aggressive swoop and shape to their actual wings and flaps on the front wing rather than actually tapering down, because you can see the height-wise it's still very much up there, so they're still loading that part of the front wing, but they've just gone for a bit more of aggressive shaping to that front wing to potentially go with their actual new addition to the front wing kind of a structure as a whole, and then the nose cone, I should say, is a snowplow. Now, Red Bull have never had a snowplow on their front wing. Mercedes and Williams were the first teams to really do it 2 years ago, or I think 3 years? I think it was 2 years ago. 2 years ago. And this was the kind of snowplow Mercedes started off with. They've evolved it to be a little bit different now. They kind of don't have this extra bit underneath that kind of that connects the two sides and kind of actually shapes an actual fully fledged plow, if you will. It's a lot of trying to describe this as best I can, but essentially Mercedes now have evolved their version of it to kind of be a little bit more streamlined and a bit more kind of precise with where they're trying to jut the air, whereas Red Bull, this is the first time they're doing it, and to do this, they've also narrowed the entire part of the front wing nose cone structure. You can see here, subtly with the lighting, you can notice that the actual chassis kind of shrinks up and thins out into the nose structure, very much like Mercedes have done for the last 2 years. If you look at a front-on view from the Mercedes of last year and the last 2 years indeed, you'll very much notice that, very quick thinning of the chassis width into the nose structure, and Red Bull have never done that. They've always had quite a wide nose, to be fair to them, actually, in the last 3-4 years, a very wide nose cone, and the last time they ran such a thin one was, I think, all the way back in like 09, where they started off with a really thin nose, and then halfway through the season they changed it to a very wide one. They've always kept through the years, basically, but to accommodate for the snowplow, and I guess also basically have less bodywork there, more space for the air to work with the snowplow. They've thinned that entire area up, and then at the same time, with the actual nose itself, very interesting. They've always had a few little cuts and kind of areas where air can pass through, or slot gaps, basically, but they've gone for now 6 different slots, essentially. I've circled 4 of them, one on the kind of front face of the nose, one on the top end, and then they've got either side as well. So there's got to be at least a few of these channeling air through into the S duct, obviously, which is here. That also gets affected by these winglets they've had been running for the entirety of last season. Because I've seen a lot of comparisons this morning on Twitter of people trying to compare the Red Bull. They compared this shot to the same shot they released this time last year, ahead of preseason for 2019. But I just, even F1 itself, like the actual official F1 account, compared it and did that same thing. I'm just thinking, have they not realised that you've got to try and compare it to the Abu Dhabi car? And in the case in point, the Abu Dhabi car, not a lot's actually changed in the bargewood area, apart from a few little fine details. So that was a little bit odd to see. But yeah, I mean, yeah, so they had these winglets as well. I just want to point that out because some people thought these winglets were new. They're not new. They're from last year at the back end of it, or pretty much the entirety of 2019. But anyway, back to these slot gaps. So 2 of these slots will inevitably funnel air into the S duct. Potentially even maybe all 4 at the top here might channel air into the S duct. In terms of the ones at the front, that's more to do with kind of the way the pressure builds up at the front of the nose cone. They're trying to play around with that and the way the air is going to actually be forced round the outside of the nose and in towards the snowplow now, that they're going to try and get this air and basically scoop it up and chuck it towards what is obviously a very intricate and important part of the F1 cars these days, because after they obviously removed all the complexity of the front wing, a lot of the aero work is now all to do with the kind of bargewood areas, trying to get that all channeled through to the rear end of the car. And also as every team tries to sucker up their side pods, it's also very important to try and get some very precise airflow towards the side pod areas. But yeah, so a very different looking nose area for the Red Bull from front on. Once you see photos, I think there's one photo that I might try and chuck up right now at Silverstone of the front view. You can very much see they've narrowed that up and copied Mercedes' kind of stance of that whole front area of the car, which I kind of like. It kind of makes a difference for one. So the livery may have not changed, but the actual shape and look of the car from the front end has actually changed quite a fair bit, and I kind of like it. We move on then to the midsection of the car. Like I said, if you are comparing it to, yes, of course, this time last year, the bargewood area looks so much different. But if you compare it to the Abu Dhabi Red Bull we had at the end of last year, it's not that different, actually. It's very, very similar. I would suspect they're saving some parts for pre-season, because obviously that's a thing that every team would want to do, trying to hide some major upgrades. But they've got some subtle changes in the way the bottom floor merges into the bargewood, the way they had a few uprights here are no longer there, and they kind of shape them instead. And then they've got, I think, a few more slot gaps here underneath the boomerang wing that they've always had for the last 2-3 seasons, really. And then finally with this bottom upright, last year I believe it was more kind of one uniform piece, whereas now they've got a slot in there, and they're two separate upright winglets, just a way to kind of jut air through the middle, accelerates it a bit better, and also they can kind of fine-tune with the rest of the car. Obviously, if there's any more kind of dagger kind of wings that I can't see from this angle potentially, or they are coming, they can kind of angle that better. In terms of the actual front of the side pod, like the inlet itself, very much the same philosophy as they ran last year. Obviously, teams like Ferrari, if you watched the video I put out yesterday, have now copied what Red Bull and McLaren have been doing for the last 2 seasons, with this kind of wing that just protrudes upright there and has a tip vortices being created, and also in itself energizes the kind of turbulent air on the top of the side pod. They've had that for the entire time, so they just stick with it. Obviously, it allows them to have an undercut also on the inlet itself. And for Red Bull, compared to the way Ferrari have done it, Red Bull also house the actual structural impact, like the thing they have to have, the FI demand that they have to make sure the side impact is going to be fine if the driver gets in a crash. They have always used that like inside the wing itself on this bottom part, and then that connects onto the wing mirror, which obviously a lot of teams now are copying the style of, as I've said in the Haas reveal and the Ferrari reveal. I'm sure other teams will also copy what Red Bull have been doing, because I think their solution was the best solution, which was essentially just a kind of a wing on top, and they've just made it structurally integral, so it's still very much an aerodynamic wing, but it's still part of the wing mirror per se. The upright, very much the same from last year. Even the floor detailing, all very similar. If you look back at the Abu Dhabi photos, very, very similar to what they ended up with. Of course, it's a launch photo, and it's a launch car in terms of the shakedown they did at Silverstone, so they may well change that all for pre-season. We'll see, and we'll see if there's going to be any updates to that. In terms of the side pod shape, that is different, actually. That is very different to last year, because the dotted line I've done is essentially the rough shape of what they had last year. They had this very quick, flat pack, kind of a vacuum seal, if you will, kind of side pod structure, the shape of it last year, which was really quite extreme to everyone. The reaction was like, oh wow, they've gone really suck it in. Whereas this year, I don't know, it's kind of weird almost. They're kind of, I don't know, gone backwards a little bit in terms of opening up the front of the side pod, but perhaps they've done that to make sure they can sucker in the rest of it as tightly as they wanted to. Of course, that might have to do with the way the Honda engine is now packaged, perhaps, because Honda obviously want to make a further step forward for this year to really give Red Bull a great chance at fighting for the championship. So perhaps the architecture of the cooling of the Honda engine has meant they've had to open that up a little bit more than they wanted to. So we'll see what the developments are like. Maybe, now there'll be some more developments in this barge area to counteract for the need to open up this area a little bit, but for sure the shaping of it has definitely changed quite a fair bit, which I didn't think was going to happen really, because like I said last year, the reaction was they had very extreme suckered in tiny side pods, which you would assume be the way they want to go. Every team wants to try and get smaller side pods basically to allow for better airflow to rear end the car. So the fact they've opened it up a little bit is a little bit odd, but just perhaps it's really just the engine architecture, which obviously is going to be a good thing. Hopefully, if the Honda engine can perform better with the sufficient cooling, then I guess that is what they got to go for. We move through to the kind of roll hoop area. Now, there is actually quite some interesting developments here. They've got small upright winglets just on the edge, on the inside face of the halo when it meets the chassis. That in itself, like any kind of uprights we've seen before, vortex generators, just that vortex induces mixing at that height of the car, essentially for the turbulent air, especially the turbulent air that comes off the halo is so turbulent. So any kind of vortex they can induce to energize the air going through will kind of keep it as a bit more structured and a bit more attached if they can to the engine cover. And then they've got these protruding winglets underneath the roll hoop. So Ferrari had the upright kind of U-shaped ears or horns, if you will. Ironic, because they're not obviously Red Bull, and Red Bull have not gone for horns because they're balls. And Red Bull have gone now for wings underneath the roll hoop. It'd be interesting to see if Red Bull and Ferrari now look at each other and maybe do what each other is doing. So maybe the Red Bull might sprout horns later on in the season, or maybe Ferrari grow these upright winglets. But again, the same thing, just trying to structure the air as it goes down across the engine cover towards the rear wing. And then the rear end, I would say it's looking at photos from last year. It's hard to tell really with the lighting, Abu Dhabi photos, because all the Abu Dhabi photos are so dark with the shadow work. But it seems they have tried to tighten it up even more so on the rear end, but that just could be my eyes playing tricks on itself. But the rear end obviously is going to be very, very important for the Red Bull team. That's obviously their kind of domain, really, is the downforce portion of the car. They've always been great at that, and the chassis side of things. But last year, they start off, like I said, slow, whereas this year, I mean, the car they're showing here, which is usually not the full car that they show up with at Australia, is already looking really good. Like in terms of the developments they made at the front end, really excite me. Like I said, this entire area, they usually don't change this a lot, but they've really gone for it with the snowplow as well, and this very interesting nose that I'm sure we won't really know fully what they're doing there until maybe later on in the season, or once an actual tech expert looks at it. But it's exciting. So that's my short analysis of the Red Bull RB16. Like I said, the big hope is now, after so many years in the V6 era of Red Bull starting slow, can they start fast? Can they just hit the ground running? Remains to be seen. From what I've seen, though, I'm actually quite positive now. After seeing this car and seeing the details, I'm very positive about that. Let me know what you guys, though, are thinking in the comments below. If you do like the look of the Red Bull, if you did enjoy this video as well and found it informative and useful to kind of see those differences, then be sure to hit that like button. If you are new around here, subscribe for weekly full-on content, and I will be doing these videos for the other cars. Renault did launch today, but if you did see the launch, Renault's launch was very odd. It wasn't really a launch of anything, to be honest. It had a pre-season testing livery. They hardly showed anything in the car, and the car's not actually physically been built yet and ready to be shown. So I don't know why they even bothered. So there won't be a video on the Renault just yet. There will be one once they actually fully launch their car at testing next week. But tomorrow we have McLaren, which will be very exciting. So if you're new around here, do get subscribed for that and the analysis on the new McLaren tomorrow. But yeah, that's been this video then on the RB16. Hope you enjoyed the rest of your day, guys. I've been aarava. Till next time, goodbye.